Imagine being the richest, most technologically advanced empire on the planet. Like, you have cities with over 1 million people, you are using paper money while the rest of the world is still, you know, lugging around sacks of metal.
Right, literal sacks of heavy coins.
Yeah. And you've unlocked the secrets of gunpowder while European knights are still figuring out chainmail. And yet, your ultimate military strategy against the massive armies threatening your borders is basically giving them your lunch money.
Just a massive official bribe to just leave you alone.
Exactly. So today we are doing a deep dive into the Song Dynasty, which ruled China from 960 to 1279 CE. And we are going to examine this incredibly sophisticated civilization through a highly unusual, almost psychological lens.
Yeah, it's a framework from our source material that forces us to look at an entire medieval empire as if it were a personality profile, specifically a sub-personality we can call Kelly.
The Kelly framework. Let me paint a picture of who Kelly is for you listening right now. Just imagine someone deeply empathetic, nurturing, morally grounded, and intricately connected to nature.
They are the quiet moral anchor of their friend group, or maybe their family.
Right. But because they are so accommodating, they constantly struggle with self-doubt. They have this tendency to over-accommodate, and they frequently feel overshadowed by louder, more aggressive forces. We all know a Kelly. I mean, some of you listening might be the Kelly.
It's a very recognizable human type.
It is.
Yeah.
But applying this to a massive medieval empire, I mean, that is a wild leap.
It really sounds counterintuitive until you dig into the core contradiction of the song. Because this was an empire that was culturally brilliant, economically dynamic, and technologically inventive to an astonishing degree.
But also incredibly vulnerable.
Right. Exactly. Militarily, it was deeply vulnerable. It existed in a fractured, violent world, totally surrounded by heavily militarized states. And it survived not through brute conquest, but through administration, commerce, and profound, almost painful adaptation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I know what you might be thinking. Like, why should you, listening to this deep dive right now, care about the political strategies of a medieval Chinese dynasty?
It's a fair question.
But the thing is, this deep dive is really a masterclass in how to survive and thrive when you absolutely are not the loudest or strongest person in the room. It is a blueprint for endurance. It shows us how systems and care can actually outlast brute force.
Yeah, it's about structural resilience. But to understand how the song became this, this Kelly figure, we really have to look at the incredibly traumatic, chaotic period they emerged from.
Right. The trauma is key here. We are talking about the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period.
You literally cannot understand the Song Dynasty without understanding the absolute nightmare that preceded it. The 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms was a solid half-century of just continuous civil war, fractured territories, and relentless warlordism.
It was basically the Wild West, but medieval China.
Completely. Emperors were being assassinated and replaced with dizzying speed. I mean, it was an era defined entirely by military might. Whoever had the biggest army made the rules, right up until someone with a bigger army came along and slaughtered them.
That sounds exhausting.
It was a trauma that burned itself into the collective psyche of the people who survived it. They were desperate for stability.
Pure chaos. Just a hyper-aggressive, dog-eat-dog environment. And out of this mess emerges the founder of the Song Dynasty, Emperor Taizu. He reunifies much of China in 960 CE. But then he does something that seems almost, counterintuitive.
Maybe even a little crazy, given the environment he just survived.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Taizu makes a defining philosophical choice. It's a gamble that would shape the next 3 centuries. He deliberately reduces the power of his own military.
Wait, he weakened his own army?
Yes, he systematically retires his top generals. There's this famous historical event called releasing the military with a cup of wine. He basically throws a massive banquet for the generals who helped him conquer the empire, gets them all drunk, and then convinces them to retire to the countryside.
Oh, wow. Just buys them off?
Basically. He gives them massive pensions so they can't overthrow him. And he elevated a civilian bureaucracy to run the empire instead. He made a conscious decision that the state would be held together by administration and order, not by military strongmen.
It's like deciding to completely skip lifting weights at the gym to focus entirely on your immune system. Like, you know you won't be able to punch the neighborhood bully if it comes down to a fight, but you are betting you can outlast them through sheer internal health.
That's a great way to look at it.
But I have to ask, isn't this Kelly instinct to choose safety and structure over aggressive force incredibly naive in a medieval world? I mean, if you were surrounded by warlords and you put down your sword to pick up a pen, Aren't you just asking to be conquered?
It totally looks naive from a purely military standpoint, but Taizu was playing a completely different game. He understood that the greatest threat to his new dynasty wasn't necessarily an invasion from the outside.
Oh, it was the internal threat.
Exactly. It was a military coup from the inside, which is exactly what destroyed the previous dynasties. So he centralized power around the emperor and an elite class of scholar officials. He decided that brain power would outmaneuver horsepower.
And the mechanism for finding that brain power was the civil service examination system, which, from the sources, this wasn't just a multiple-choice test. The sheer psychological weight of these exams is terrifying.
Oh, arguably the most rigorous intellectual gauntlet in human history. To govern this massive territory, Taizu and his successors relied on administrators chosen through these exams, and they were based entirely on classical literature, poetry, and philosophy.
And the mechanics of taking the test were harrowing.
Absolutely brutal. Candidates would travel to the capital and be locked inside tiny individual cells for 3 days and 2 nights.
Literally a box. You are eating, sleeping, and using a bucket in the same tiny cell while trying to write these profound philosophical essays.
Right. And the pressure was so immense that candidates frequently suffered mental breakdowns. I mean, some even died in their cells from exhaustion or exposure.
That is intense.
But the most fascinating part is how the state tried to ensure absolute fairness. To prevent any examiner from recognizing a candidate's handwriting and showing bias, the state employed legions of scribes. They would copy out every single exam in red ink before they were graded.
Wow. Anonymous grading in the 10th century. That is a level of administrative paranoia, and I mean that in a good way, that perfectly aligns with the Kelly profile.
It really does.
Kelly is the root system. Kelly is the one making sure everyone is fed, the rules are fair, the structure is sound, and nobody is cheating. But here's the thing. If you intentionally weaken your military in a hostile medieval landscape, and you put all your faith in guys who are really good at writing essays, you have to rely on something else to sustain your empire.
You need a completely different kind of armor.
Right. And for the Song, that armor was unprecedented economic and technological innovation.
Because necessity drives explosive growth. Since the Song could not rely on looting neighbors or expanding their territory to generate wealth, they had to maximize what they already had.
So they turned inward.
Yeah. And the bedrock of this incredible prosperity was agriculture. Specifically, the introduction of a fast-ripening, drought-resistant strain of rice from Vietnam known as champa rice.
I love that a type of rice is basically the superhero of this era. But how does rice actually change the destiny of an entire empire?
It alters the fundamental math of human survival. Traditional rice required massive amounts of water and a very long growing season. It was confined to flat, heavily irrigated paddies.
So it was a massive labor investment for just one harvest.
Exactly. But champa rice matured in just over 2 months instead of 5. And because it was drought-resistant, it could be grown on terraced hillsides. So, in the fertile, warm, and wet southern regions of China, particularly around the Yangtze River Delta, farmers were suddenly harvesting 2, sometimes even 3 crops in a single year.
That is a staggering caloric surplus. Suddenly you aren't just surviving, you're stockpiling.
And stockpiling changes the entire psychology of a civilization. Once starvation isn't your daily fear, human capital is freed up. A massive demographic explosion follows.
Right, the population basically doubled.
It did, reaching well over 100 million people. But more importantly, because not everyone has to break their back in the mud just to stave off famine, you see a massive diversification of labor. You get the emergence of what we might call the world's first true middle class.
People can become artisans, merchants, scholars, and entertainers. And this leads directly to the sheer scale of urban life during this time, which is just mind-blowing. We have cities in the Song Dynasty reaching populations of over 1 million people.
Places like Kaifeng and later Hangzhou, and these weren't just big military camps, they are 247 metropolises. Marco Polo would later describe Hangzhou as the greatest city in the world, and for good reason.
The urban infrastructure was staggering. I want you to just picture this. Night markets that stay open until dawn. Bustling multi-story restaurants with extensive paper menus.
The paper menus always shock people.
It's so modern. And they had specialized shops selling branded goods. There is actually evidence of a needle shop with a distinct rabbit logo, which is essentially medieval branding. You have street performers, storytellers, guilds for different professions.
It really challenges our assumptions.
It does. This is not the dark, muddy, static picture we usually associate with the medieval period in Europe. This is a vibrant, hyper-commercialized consumer culture.
It completely forces us to rethink our chronological biases. The Song economy was arguably the most advanced of the medieval world. And to manage an economy of that scale, they had to engineer solutions. They expanded the use of movable type printing.
Way before Gutenberg.
Centuries before. While Gutenberg gets the credit in the West, the Song were using baked clay and later wooden movable type to print agricultural manuals, medical texts, and philosophical treatises.
Which feeds right back into that massive civil service exam system. I mean, if you need a legion of scholars to run the government, you need a mountain of books to train them.
Exactly. The technology supported the administrative state. And then you have the invention of paper money.
Which is huge.
It is. Carrying heavy strings of copper coins over long distances was incredibly inefficient and, honestly, dangerous for merchants. It started as private deposit receipts. Like, a merchant would leave his heavy coins at a secure location and take a piece of paper representing that value.
Like an IOU.
Right. And the government eventually took over the system, creating the first state-issued fiat currency in history.
But wait, didn't that lead to inflation? If the government can just print money whenever it needs to pay the bills, don't they eventually print too much?
Oh, they absolutely did face inflation, especially later in the dynasty when military pressures mounted. But in its prime, the paper money system streamlined massive commercial transactions and stimulated the economy in ways metal coinage never could.
It just greased the wheels of commerce.
It did. They also advanced the magnetic compass for maritime navigation, and they developed advanced gunpowder formulas, using it for everything from fire lances to rudimentary bombs.
And this is a crucial distinction we need to make. It's the Kelly instinct again. Kelly doesn't invent things just to show off. Kelly invents a better filing system, because if she doesn't, the whole office collapses.
What's fascinating here is that the technology was a coping mechanism for the pressure they were under.
Exactly.
They had to govern an immense, booming population, circulate knowledge efficiently, and keep the economy churning to pay for their massive administrative state and their defensive needs. Innovation was driven by the absolute necessity of maintaining internal order.
And the physical geography of China itself acted as the circulatory system for this whole ecosystem. You have the Yellow River Basin in the north and the Yangtze Delta in the south, and they were connected by the Grand Canal.
This wasn't just a river, it was the ultimate supply chain.
Right. If the scholar officials were the brain of the Song Dynasty, the waterways were the veins and arteries keeping it all alive. The Grand Canal allowed the massive caloric surplus of the south to physically travel north, feeding the capital, Kaifeng, and sustaining the armies stationed on the borders.
That internal connectivity provided incredible economic flexibility. It meant that even when they faced territorial losses, they had the internal infrastructure to reorganize, adapt, and continue thriving. They were deeply rooted.
But those roots were constantly being tested. Because when you create a wealthy, thriving, culturally rich society that is economically booming, but you have intentionally weakened your military, you naturally make yourself a massive target.
You really do.
You become the kid on the playground with the newest sneakers, a pocket full of lunch money, and no older brother to protect you. So how does a pacifist, system-oriented society deal with aggressive neighbors?
This is where the geopolitical reality of the medieval world violently clashes with the Song's internal philosophy. The Song were surrounded by heavily militarized, highly mobile nomadic and semi-nomadic states.
These weren't small tribes either.
No, these were powerful empires in their own right. To the north, you had the Liao dynasty, founded by the Khitan people. To the northwest, controlling crucial Silk Road trade routes, you had the Western Xia.
So they are basically boxed in.
Yeah, the Song emperors were essentially playing a constant, high-stakes game of multi-front diplomacy against cavalry-based armies that could easily outmaneuver their infantry.
And their primary diplomatic tool was, well, opening their wallets. I want to look at the Treaty of Chanyuan in the year 1005. The Song are fighting the Liao dynasty. The Liao actually pushed deep into Song territory.
It was a very real crisis.
And instead of fighting to the bitter end, raising massive conscript armies and trying to crush the Liao, the Song negotiate a peace treaty. And the terms are that the Song will pay the Liao a massive annual tribute of silver and silk just to stop attacking them.
They formally agreed to buy peace.
I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't that just paying mafia protection money? Like, nice empire you got here, be a shame if my cavalry burned it down. Doesn't that prove that the Kelly strategy is fundamentally flawed?
I can see why you'd say that.
Because this is the shadow side of overaccommodation, right?
Yeah.
It's conflict avoidance taken to a pathological level.
It is very easy to view it as weakness. And certainly there were hawks within the Song court who felt exactly the way you do. They thought it was deeply humiliating to call the Liao emperor brother and pay him off.
I bet they hated it.
Oh, they did. But let's look at the actual math behind that pragmatism. Maintaining a standing army on the northern border, supplying them with grain over hundreds of miles, and engaging in constant warfare was astronomically expensive.
Much more expensive than the tribute.
Exponentially more. We're talking about draining the state coffers, not to mention the massive loss of human life.
So what were the terms of the bribe? The tribute.
The annual payment was 100,000 ounces of silver and 200,000 bolts of silk.
That sounds like a mountain of wealth.
Yeah.
I mean, 100,000 ounces.
It sounds massive. But for the Song economy, which was a roaring engine of commerce, that tribute amounted to less than 2% of their total state revenue.
Less than 2%. Wow.
And here is the kicker. Because the Song produced all the luxury goods the Liao wanted, much of that silver eventually flowed right back into the Song economy through cross-border trade.
Oh, that is brilliant. So it wasn't just a line item in the budget. It was an economic stimulus package disguised as a ransom.
Exactly.
They realized they could literally afford to outsource their border security to the people threatening them. They chose stability over pride. They swallowed their ego to keep the system intact. We will pay you if it keeps our ecosystem alive.
It was incredibly calculating.
That is such a Kelly move. It's checking your ego at the door for the sake of the family's peace.
But paying tribute only solves the immediate military threat from the Liao. It doesn't side the fact that the Western Xia were squeezing their land-based trade routes. The traditional Silk Road was becoming blocked or prohibitively expensive to use.
How did they adapt to that? I mean, if you can't walk, how do you trade?
You sail. When the overland routes became too dangerous, the Song simply pivoted. They turned their attention to the sea. The Song Dynasty oversaw a massive expansion in maritime trade.
Right, the port cities.
Southern port cities like Quanzhou and Guangzhou became bustling, cosmopolitan hubs of global commerce.
If one door closes, grow roots in another direction. And the ships they built for this were incredible. We aren't talking about little fishing boats here.
Far from it. They built massive, multi-masted junks. These ships had watertight bulkheads, meaning if a section of the hull was breached, the ship wouldn't sink.
Which is a technology Europe wouldn't adopt for centuries.
Exactly. They were equipped with magnetic compasses, allowing them to navigate open ocean away from the coastlines. They were capable of carrying huge quantities of goods. They traded with Southeast Asia, the Chola dynasty in India, the Islamic world under the Abbasids, and indirectly, all the way to East Africa.
So while they are technically losing ground or being boxed in on the continent, they are quietly becoming a global economic powerhouse on the oceans.
They really were.
They're exporting silk, porcelain, and tea, and bringing back spices, ivory, frankincense, and new ideas. They are building a massive international network.
And that network created the immense wealth that helped fund the state, pay those tributes, and sustain their massive urban populations. They survived by making themselves indispensable to the global economy.
Okay, so externally, they are managing this incredible stress through pragmatic diplomacy, tribute, and economic pivots. But living under the constant anxiety of border threats, knowing that these massive armies are just on the other side of the frontier, that has to take a severe psychological toll on a society.
It absolutely does.
You need an incredibly strong internal anchor, a moral foundation, to keep the society from fracturing under that kind of chronic low-grade terror.
Which brings us to the intellectual and spiritual life of the Song, perhaps its most enduring legacy. During this period, we see the rise of what we now call Neo-Confucianism.
Right, because before this, it was a bit of a mix, right?
Yeah, for centuries, Chinese thought had been a blend of the three teachings. You had Confucianism, focusing on social harmony, ritual, and filial piety. You had Buddhism, offering metaphysical depth and a path to escaping suffering. And Taoism, focusing on yielding and harmony with nature.
But the Song intellectuals wanted something more cohesive, right? They needed a unified theory of everything.
The towering figure in this movement was Zhu Xi. He synthesized these traditions, but grounded them firmly in a new Confucian framework. Zhu Xi established the idea that the entire universe operates according to a fundamental moral and rational structure, which he called Li, or principle.
I want to make sure I grasp this because philosophy can get dense. What exactly is Li?
Think of like the grain in a piece of wood, or the laws of physics. It's the hidden natural code of the universe. Zhu Xi was saying that just as a tree grows according to a specific biological pattern, human society has a natural moral pattern.
Oh, I see.
If you fight the grain of the wood splinters. If you fight the moral structure of the universe, society collapses.
That is a beautiful analogy. And the implication is that human beings possess this same moral structure within themselves.
Yeah.
The goal of life, therefore, is through rigorous self-cultivation, study, and reflection to align your internal moral compass with the fundamental moral grain of the universe.
Exactly. And here is the mechanism that made it so powerful. This wasn't just abstract philosophy being debated in ivory towers. The texts curated and interpreted by Zhu Xi, known as the Four Books, became the literal operating system of the government.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
They became the core curriculum for the civil service exams.
Right. If you wanted to serve in the Song government, if you wanted power, you had to master this specific interpretation of the universe, which is brilliant on one level. It creates a path for social mobility based on merit.
In theory, yes.
In theory, a poor farmer's son who studies hard enough could pass the exams and become a powerful government official. It creates a shared civilizational identity. Everyone in power is operating from the exact same moral playbook.
It created profound internal cohesion. But, as with any system that demands strict adherence to a specific order, it had severe drawbacks.
We have to look at the full picture here. The pressure of these exams bred intense conformity. But even more darkly, while this society valued order, restraint, and moral cultivation, there was a tragic shadow side to this pursuit of perfect order.
Yes, particularly regarding gender norms.
The Kelly desire for everyone to be in their proper place took a very dark turn for women.
The Neo-Confucian emphasis on hierarchy and proper roles within the family led to increasingly strict patriarchal norms. The ideals for elite women shifted heavily toward domesticity, submissiveness, and isolation from the public sphere.
And the most visceral, physical manifestation of this desire for control was the spread of foot binding.
It's hard to even think about.
It is. But we have to understand the mechanics of it to understand the psychology of the era. It began among elite circles during the Song Dynasty, initially as a dance practice in the imperial court, but gradually morphed and spread.
It became an agonizing practice.
It literally broke the arches and bound the toes of young girls under the foot to keep them artificially small.
It tied their physical mobility and their bodily autonomy to a warped aesthetic of fragility and domestic submission. A woman with bound feet could not walk long distances. She was physically confined to the inner quarters of the house.
It's the ultimate tragic irony. The civilization that prized itself on avoiding physical violence on the battlefield institutionalized profound physical violence against its own daughters in the name of social harmony.
It really highlights the dark side of that order.
The infrastructure that provides stability can also be the infrastructure that cages people. The Song's search for internal balance was fraught with these profound contradictions.
They were also searching for balance through art. The aesthetic culture of the Song is deeply reflective of this psychological state. We are not talking about triumphalist art showing emperors crushing their enemies.
Nothing like Roman statues of generals.
Right. Look at the monumental northern landscape paintings. Artists like Fan Quan painted huge, misty mountains where the human figures, if you can even spot them, are tiny, almost insignificant compared to the vastness of nature.
And later, the Southern Song art is described as more lyrical, intimate, focusing on a single bird on a branch or a delicate plum blossom. What is the mechanism behind this shift in focus?
This aesthetic was a direct response to the geopolitical turmoil they were experiencing. When the human world, the world of borders, politics, and warfare, is terrifyingly unstable, you turn to nature to find permanent truth.
To ground yourself.
Exactly. You look at a mountain that stood for 1,000,000 years to remind yourself of endurance. The restraint, the elegance, the use of negative space in these paintings. It was an active search for emotional regulation.
It's the visual equivalent of taking a deep breath. It is soft, observant, emotionally intelligent. And there is one historical figure who embodies this introspective mindset perfectly, and that's Sima Guang.
Oh, yes.
He was a high-ranking official who wrote a massive historical work called the Zizi Tongjian, which translates to the comprehensive mirror for aid in government.
Sima Guang believed that history was the ultimate teacher. He compiled this massive chronicle of previous dynasties not just to record facts, but to provide a moral mirror for the emperor and the officials.
To reflect on their actions.
Right. The idea was to look at the successes and failures of the past to understand how to act justly in the present.
The source material connects this directly to what they call Kelly's twin mirror philosophy. It's this constant, quiet self-reflection, living your life constantly asking, am I someone I can trust? Am I learning from my past mistakes? Am I acting with integrity?
It requires a lot of discipline.
It really does. That is the internal anchor that allowed the song to navigate the chaos outside their borders.
But the tragic irony of the Kelly strategy is that by prioritizing peace and trusting the wrong people, you sometimes invite the very violence you're trying to avoid. And that exact nightmare became reality as we move into the next phase of their history.
A turning point.
Yeah. For over a century, the strategy of diplomacy and paying tribute worked, but eventually it catastrophically failed.
We are looking at the year 1127, the Jing Kang incident, and this centers around Emperor Huzong.
Huzong is the embodiment of the song's paradox. He was an absolute aesthetic genius, one of the greatest painters and calligraphers to ever sit on the throne. He was a massive patron of the arts.
But politically?
Politically, he was utterly negligent.
The borders are collapsing, and the Emperor of China is literally rearranging rocks in his garden. I mean, was he delusional, or was there some sort of Taoist philosophical justification he was clinging to?
It was a mix of intense aesthetic obsession and profound denial. He was obsessed with gathering exotic plants and uniquely shaped stones, the Hualigang network, to build a perfect Taoist garden in the capital.
While the empire is threatened.
Yes. He believed that achieving perfect aesthetic harmony in his garden would magically align the empire with cosmic harmony. While he was tending to his rocks, a new, fierce power emerged in the north, the Jurchen people, who founded the Jin Dynasty.
These Song make a fateful, terrible geopolitical calculation. They look at the Jin and they think, hey, we've been paying tribute to the Liao dynasty for over 100 years. We hate the Liao. Let's ally with these new Jin guys, team up, and wipe out the Liao together.
A classic enemy of my enemy move.
Exactly, which they do. The joint campaign is a success. The Liao are destroyed.
But the Jin, having seen firsthand how militarily weak and disorganized the Song forces truly were during that joint campaign, immediately turned on their new allies.
They smelled blood in the water.
They absolutely did. The Jin cavalry swept south with terrifying speed. The Song forces, softened by decades of peace and bureaucratic mismanagement, were completely unprepared. In 1127, the Jin breached the walls of the magnificent Song capital of Kaifeng.
It is the deepest Kelly fear realized. It is the visceral, horrifying realization of, what if being gentle? What if being artistic? What if my entire philosophy of care just isn't enough to protect what I love?
The Jin captured Emperor Huizong, his son who had just taken the throne, and thousands of members of the imperial court. They looted the city of its priceless art, its books, its wealth, and dragged the entire royal family north into frozen captivity in Manchuria.
The trauma of that moment for the Chinese cultural memory is immense. The capital is sacked, the emperor is a prisoner. The entire northern half of the country, the traditional heartland of Chinese civilization, the Yellow River Valley, is lost forever.
It is devastating.
The remnants of the court, led by a surviving prince, have to frantically flee south, eventually setting up a new capital in Hangzhou, beginning the era we call the Southern Song.
It was a complete shattering of their worldview. And in the aftermath of that trauma, huddled in the south behind the Yangtze River, the Song court engaged in a bitter, existential debate about how to survive and who was to blame for the apocalypse.
This debate gives us three fascinating historical figures. And these aren't simple Marvel movie heroes and villains. These are complex people dealing with an impossible situation.
Very complex.
Let's start with the reformer, Wang Anshi. He actually lived before the fall of the North, but his legacy hung over this whole debate. What was his deal?
Wang Anshi recognized the structural weaknesses of the Song long before the Jin invaded. He saw that the wealth was concentrating at the top, the farmers were suffering, and the military was bloated and inefficient.
So he tried to fix it.
He introduced what were known as the new policies. He believed the state needed to actively intervene in the economy to protect the poorest citizens and strengthen the military.
But his most famous policy, the Green Sprouts Loan Program, ended up being incredibly controversial. Why? What was the mechanism there?
The idea was noble. Give government loans to poor farmers in the spring so they could buy seeds and they would pay it back after the autumn harvest. This was supposed to protect them from wealthy landlords who acted as predatory loan sharks.
That sounds like a good idea.
On paper, yes, but the execution was disastrous. Local officials were given quotas for how many loans they had to issue. To meet their quotas and get promoted, they started forcing loans on farmers who didn't even need them and then charging ruinous interest rates.
So the state became the very loan shark it was trying to destroy.
Exactly.
So when the empire collapsed, conservatives like Sima Guang pointed at Wang Anshi's reforms and said, "See, you tampered with the natural order, you tried to manipulate the economy, and you brought down the wrath of heaven."
That was the conservative narrative.
But post-collapse, when they are in the south fighting for their lives, a new figure emerges. The general, Yu Fei.
Yu Fei is the mama bear figure. He is the closest thing to a classic, unyielding military hero the Song have. He's a disciplined, fiercely loyal, and he actually leads highly successful military campaigns against the Jin.
He's actually pushing back.
He pushes his armies north, trying to reclaim the lost heartlands and rescue the captured emperors. He wants to fight. He refuses to accept that the north is gone.
He represents the faction that believed the time for accommodation was over. The time for the Kelly strategy had passed. It was time to fight fire with fire. He famously had the characters for "serve the country with utmost loyalty" tattooed on his back by his mother.
He was a very powerful symbol.
But Yu Fei's military success deeply alarmed the third figure in this triad, Qin Hui, the chancellor.
Qin Hui is the ultimate pragmatist, and historically he is remembered as one of the greatest villains in Chinese history. Qin Hui looked at the geopolitical reality and concluded that endless war with the Jin, even if Yu Fei was winning a few battles, would eventually bankrupt the Southern Song and lead to their total destruction.
He saw the bigger math.
The Jin were simply too strong. Qin Hui believed the only way to save the dynasty was to negotiate a peace treaty, which meant officially submitting to the Jin and accepting the permanent loss of the north.
But Yu Fei, the popular, successful, charismatic general, stood in the way of that peace. He wouldn't stop fighting. So Qin Hui orchestrates Yu Fei's arrest. He brings him back to the capital, throws him in a dark prison, and has him executed on completely fabricated charges of treason.
It was a brutal political assassination.
He murders the national hero just to secure a peace treaty.
The trauma of that betrayal is deep. For centuries, Qin Hui has been reviled. There are literally iron statues of him and his wife kneeling in shame in front of Yu Fei's tomb, where visitors historically would spit on them or hit them with sticks.
But here is the brutal synthesis of this situation. We look back and say Qin Hui is a kneeling villain and Yu Fei is a martyr. But reality is so much more agonizing.
It really is.
Sometimes, protecting a fragile system, saving the millions of lives in the South who would have starved or died in a prolonged, unwinnable war, means making horrific, soul-crushing compromises that look exactly like betrayal from the outside.
It's an impossible choice.
Qin Hui made the ultimate Dark Kelly sacrifice. He took on the role of the hated villain to ensure the survival of the root system.
It is a dark, complex pragmatism. And the most uncomfortable truth of all is that Qin Hui's strategy worked. The peace treaty he signed held.
Wow, so it actually bought them time.
It did. The Southern Song, despite losing half their territory, survived and actually thrived in the South for another 150 years. They completely adapted to their new reality. They doubled down on maritime trade, their culture became even more refined, and their new capital, Hangzhou, grew even wealthier than Kaifeng had been.
They built a beautiful, prosperous life in the shadow of their trauma. They became masters of the art of living well under pressure. But you knew there was a but coming. Eventually, a force emerges on the global stage that cannot be bought off, cannot be out-administered, and simply cannot be reasoned with.
The Mongol Empire.
The final chapter of the Song Dynasty. Genghis Khan and his successors.
The rise of the Mongols completely redrew the map of the world. They were an unprecedented military machine. Highly mobile, ruthlessly effective, and strategically brilliant.
They changed everything.
But what made them truly terrifying was their ability to absorb the technologies and strategies of the people they conquered. They didn't just rely on cavalry charges. They conscripted Chinese and Muslim siege engineers to build massive counterweight trebuchets to smash city walls.
So they learned and adapted.
They first destroyed the Jin dynasty, the very people who had chased the Song south, and then they turned their eyes on the Southern Song.
But I think it's important to note that the Song didn't just fold immediately. This wasn't a sudden collapse where the Mongols showed up and the Song surrendered.
Not at all. The Mongols conquered vast swaths of Eurasia, from Russia to the Middle East, in a matter of years, but the Southern Song held out against them for decades.
For decades?
Yes, it was a slow, grueling erosion of their defenses. The Song used their wealth, their heavily fortified cities, their naval superiority on the massive Yangtze River, and early gunpowder weapons to resist. The siege of the twin cities of Xiangyang and Fancheng alone lasted for 5 agonizing years.
5 years of siege. That is incredible resilience. But the Mongol war machine, eventually led by Kublai Khan, was simply relentless. They slowly squeezed the life out of the Song defenses. It all culminates in 1279 at the Battle of Yamen, which isn't a land battle at all. It's a massive naval clash in the Pearl River Delta.
It is a deeply melancholy end to 3 centuries of history. The remaining Song forces are trapped, their fleet is destroyed by the Mongols.
It's the absolute end of the line.
A loyal minister, seeing that all is lost and wanting to spare the emperor the humiliation of capture, takes the last Song emperor, who is literally just an 8-year-old child, in his arms and jumps from a ship into the sea, drowning them both. The Song dynasty falls, and Kublai Khan establishes the Yuan dynasty over all of China.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to ask the ultimate question. Why did they really fall? We cannot simply say they were bad at warfare or inherently weak. I mean, they fought off the greatest military empire in human history longer than almost anyone else on the planet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they fell because they intentionally built a world optimized for care, administration, and internal meaning in a geopolitical landscape that increasingly and overwhelmingly rewarded speed, brute force, and conquest.
The vulnerability was there from the start.
Exactly. The vulnerability was baked into their initial design by Emperor Taizu 3 centuries earlier. The system that protected them from internal warlords made them ultimately susceptible to an external apex predator.
They brought a beautifully crafted, incredibly complex administrative system to a cavalry fight. So what does this all mean? If they ultimately lost the physical war, if the child emperor drowned, was the Kelly strategy a failure?
It's the central tension of their history.
I look at the legacy of this era, and I have to say, no, it wasn't a failure at all. Because while the Song lost the territory and the imperial family died out, their infrastructure survived. The software they coded for Chinese civilization kept running long after the hardware was destroyed.
The Mongols conquered the land, but they could not erase the systems the Song had built. The scholar-bureaucrat ideal, the massive examination system, the Neo-Confucian moral framework, these became the permanent foundations of East Asian civilization.
They became indispensable again.
Exactly. The Ming and Qing dynasties that followed, and even modern meritocracies, owe a massive debt to the Song blueprint. The Mongols eventually had to adopt Song administrative practices just to govern the empire they had conquered.
Their printing culture preserved their literature for eternity. Their landscape aesthetics, their tea culture, their ceramics, these defined what we think of as refined Eastern art globally. Even today, the idea that a strong, centralized state can coexist with a vibrant, bustling market economy is a distinctly Song echo.
That's a profound point.
They lost the political war, but they unequivocally won the cultural war.
They proved that a civilization can be politically pressured, forced into agonizing compromises, and even conquered, yet remain culturally formative and dominant.
Which brings us to the ultimate lesson of this entire deep dive. The Song dynasty is proof that you don't have to be the loudest, the most violent, or the most aggressive to matter. They made a conscious choice to prioritize systems over chaos, to choose culture over conquest, and to build an economy of care rather than an economy of extraction.
It was a very deliberate choice.
Yes, it made them vulnerable, it led to historical traumas and heartbreaking losses, but it also made them immortal. They built a root system so deep and so wide that even when the tree above ground was chopped down, the roots kept feeding the soil.
And that leads to a profound reflection for anyone listening right now. The idea that infrastructure becomes identity during unstable times is incredibly relevant.
Absolutely.
The Song dynasty survived its deepest traumas for centuries because it had an unshakable infrastructure of daily rituals, moral reflection, and cultural habits. When the external pressures of your own life mount, when you are facing situations you can't just fight or brute force your way out of, what is the infrastructure of your own identity?
What a question to end on.
What are the quiet daily habits, the mental models, and the core values you fall back on to prove who you are, even when you feel like you are losing ground?
That is the question to carry with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reflecting, keep learning, and no matter how loud the room gets, keep tending to your own root systems.